I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. And thanks again. Handing it over to Joel.
All right, thanks, Megan. So no surprise that our inversion season just passed is caused by emissions that are trapped in our valley, in the Wasatch Front and the Cache Valley. And we've been working for years to try to find solutions to that. But before you can actually develop a strategy, you have to understand your emissions inventory. And one of the areas that emit or contribute to our wintertime inversion area is wood burning. Now, we have been using our inventory for wood burning data that was developed by the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, and that data was came about from a national survey that was conducted some years back. We wanted to make sure that the data that was projected from that survey was really accurate, so that when we do our modeling and play our games with the models, the what-if games, and the what-if games really are strategies. We manipulate the model and say if we cut emissions here or there by this much, or what happens. So it's important that our inventory is accurate. So we wanted to get a survey out there and find out if the data, the localized data, matches what EPA has told us from a study that had been done quite some time ago. So we developed a survey with the help of people like John, who you'll hear later, experts in the field. And we handed that survey over to a company called ICF, which is a survey company, to implement the survey. This was done in the winter of 2015, which unfortunately turned out to be a bad time to do that. We got grant money from the legislature to do our research, and so we had to use that money during that winter. And I say that was unfortunate because, as you recall, the winter of 2015 was unusually warm. And when you have a warm winter, there's not as much wood burning going on. I'll talk about that later. So the area of study is what we call the non-attainment area. This is the area that we failed to meet the national standard for the fine particulates, which is called PM 2.5. And on your map to the right, starting from the south in Utah County, the non-attainment area is composed of all of Utah County, all of Salt Lake County, Davis, portions, most of Weber, and the portions of Tooele and Box Elder County. And as you might imagine, the reason that it doesn't incorporate the rest of Box Elder and Tooele County is because it's sparse population and we're able to meet the air quality in those areas. And then finally, the Cache Valley up in the north, and that purple are the non-attainment areas, and that's the areas where we sampled. The intent of this survey was to statistically conduct a survey that statistically provided data that could be projected across the entire counties. The way we handled this was, aside from talking to people, experts like John, to get information that was very specific to wood burning and appliances, we also contacted air districts that had already performed these type of surveys to find out information, their learnings. And what we learned from each air district that had done this is they had difficulty getting good information from the wood burners in regard to the amount of wood they burn. We measure wood burns in cords, and the average person just doesn't understand what a cord of wood is. So we looked at the ways that the other districts had presented this information, and most of them presented the dimensions of a cord, and I think that was part of the problem. So we kind of thought about, well, how can we present this in a way that Utahns understand? And we all know that Utahns love their trucks, and they all know the capacity of their trucks. So to the right of your screen, you'll see that we have different size trucks, and you probably can't read the small print, but we define the amount of space that a cord of wood takes up in those trucks. And we thought that doing it that way, people would understand, are they burning a truckload a year or 2 truckloads a year? And what we found was that even though we did this, we had a few respondents that provided data that just didn't really make any sense. But overall, we think that this worked fairly well. So we sent out this survey, and if you get a survey that asks you about wood burning and you don't have a wood burning appliance, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to toss the survey. In order to make the survey statistically significant, we have to have non-burners respond as well. Otherwise, it's a biased data set. So what we did is we took survey questions that was sent out in 2013 by Envision Utah, where they asked members of the community all sorts of questions about air quality and their views on it. So essentially, the beginning of the survey included camouflaged questions, the intent of which was to get you interested in the survey, and then when you were finally interested in it, if you were not a burner, you would hopefully complete the survey. And it seemed to have worked fairly well. There's a Dillman method, design method, shown below, and it's really, we use this method, and it's just a method of refreshing people's information as to survey coming, survey here, reminder of survey, and so on. The response rate is very important. We wanted to make sure we had a statistical significance of at least 95%, and there are other statistical variables that are important in order to be able to project the data across the entire county, especially counties like Box Elder and Tooele County, when we were only sampling a portion of those counties. When we throw all those variables in there, we come up with a total of that we needed 8,600 responses, and you can see we've shown you the numbers that we needed in each county, and those numbers are based on population, density, then throwing into that equation with the statistical variables. And what you see is that we had a completion of approximately 30% overall. In some cases in Box Elder, we had as high as almost 39%. And from a surveyor's perspective, that is outstanding. Anytime you get anything above 10%, that's great. If you're doing 15%, you're usually happy. So 30% overall is excellent. We asked them all sorts of questions, and there's not enough time to go through the entire survey. I picked some of the simple questions that we've asked, and I'll also present the burning information. But I want you to understand that what I'm showing you is not by any means the depth of the survey. And so at the end, there'll be some summary information that will provide the actual data on wood burning. So the first question of importance we thought was, what is your primary heat source? And we know that natural gas distribution, at least in Salt Lake County, is very good. And in fact, 88% said they use natural gas. And if you look at wood, it's pretty low down at less than 1%. We asked them if they have any backup heat source, and you see 50% had none, and wood comes in at 20%. We asked them if they had any kind of wood burning appliances, and that's the pie chart on the left, and you see that 32% said they had an appliance. So any appliance is a fireplace, a wood stove, anything that they can burn wood. We then asked them, of those individuals who had these appliances, how many of them had used them in the last 12 months? And only 42% had used them. Now remember, I mentioned that 2015 was a warm winter, so that didn't surprise us. As far as incidents of wood burning in appliances, this one really surprised us. Basically, 21% used fireplaces and only 7% used wood stoves. and I really thought that the wood stove usage would be much higher, and the fireplaces would only be high in areas like downtown areas, the old portions of Salt Lake, because of the home densities, and we know that there are a lot of fireplaces in those old homes. But overall, fireplaces really came up much higher than wood stoves, so that was a surprise. So this is a compilation of the data. We asked all sorts of questions about all sorts of different appliances, much too detailed to go into, but essentially this summary table tells you that on the first column, the total number of households for the entire 7-county areas is roughly 29,000 households. You can see the breakdown for each county. The next column to the right shows you the response, the N value, the response that told us how many had wood-burning appliances in their home, and then the next column next to that is the percentage of those. And then the next column is the raw data, or the finished data of what I've already discussed, was how many actually burned during a 12-month period. And so the total cords burned is where I really want to go to. And I'll just focus in on all areas. So that the total number of cords burned was a little over 94,000 cords. And then when we divide that by the number of households, it basically says that an average household burned 4/10 of a cord. And that wasn't too surprising. Now, the last column are the numbers from the EPA study that I mentioned before. And according to the EPA study, it says that for these 7 counties, they estimated that 136,000 cords had actually been burned, not the 94,000 we came up with. So on the face value, you would say, well, boy, that's a big difference. So was the EPA study wrong? And we don't really think the EPA study is wrong. First of all, the EPA study was national, and it was a much larger data set than what we have. Ours was just a snapshot at a time when there was not a lot of wood burning because it was a very warm winter, and the price of natural gas and propane were probably the lowest they had been in years, and probably maybe even the lowest in the country. And when you have that situation, people are more inclined to use natural gas or propane that they have than to go out and wood burn, and we know that based from what we've heard at hearings and also dealing with the hearth industry, the local hearth industry, which we have a fairly good relationship with. So we think that the 94,000 number is probably just a snapshot number, and we are more confident that the 136,000 cords is probably more realistic for a typical winter, which we haven't had a typical winter for some time. Now, 136 cords, that doesn't really tell you what the emissions. So that translates to 871 tons of combined emissions. And when I say combined emissions, wood smoke is composed of a little over 60% of gases rather, and the rest are particles in different phases. And the gas phase is fairly complicated. The portion of the gas phase that we're interested in are the volatile organic carbons, the VOCs. The reason we're interested in those is because our inversion traps those VOCs under the inversion, and the VOCs react with nitrogen oxides in the presence of sunlight. And that reaction forms these particulates, the fine particulates, the PM2.5, that are causing us our problem. We have an overabundance of VOCs in our valley, and so our strategy is really to focus first on VOCs. And since wood smoke has a large contribution from these gases, we're particularly interested in that from that perspective. So 871 tons is the emissions that combined emissions. Again, actually about 66% of that are the gases, and most of those are the VOCs. There are other components, but most of it is the VOCs. And that's one of the reasons that we wanted to get some really good numbers, because we have to enter reliable numbers into emission numbers into our model, so that when we develop strategies, we can estimate the resultant effect. Now, you probably, or you may have heard that the governor last year had proposed a total ban on wood burning, and the general population really was opposed to that. And the reason that he had thought that perhaps that would be one strategy was because of this large amount of VOCs coming off from wood burning. Unfortunately, not everyone has the luxury of having natural gas, and in past years, the cost of propane was relatively high in comparison to natural gas. So in remote areas where natural gas is not available, those households really have to depend heavily on wood burning as a secondary source. So it was really not a feasible alternative. And when we remove wood burning entirely in our modeling, it does show a substantial increase. So we really had to look at other alternatives and ways to reduce VOCs, because frankly we just thought that the present regulation where we restrict wood burning during the worst portions of the winter was really the most reasonable way to deal with this. And individuals who are sole source heaters of wood can be on a registry that we have that allows them to burn during that period. So with that, I'll take any questions.
I think our audience is pretty set. So I'm going to hand it over to John. So just a reminder, folks, go ahead and hang up your phones now, and turn up your speakers on your computers to listen to John's talk right now.
Okay, right. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you, John.
Okay, great, thanks. And thanks to Joel for teeing all this up. That's actually a great data trove he has there. There are not too many states that have been able to get that kind of data about wood burning appliances and habits in their states. So I'm sure it'll be very useful. I guess a big question though is what you're going to do with that data and what the next steps are. So if we can get Joel back on, I would love to hear what the next steps are that the state is going to take. Anyway, thanks for having me on. I'm let's see, I am the head of a small nonprofit in DC, or right outside DC, and we are a pro-wood burning group. We'd like to see, am I not moving the slides forward? I don't know if you can do that.
Just click the mouse on the screen there, and then it should sort of activate it. Or else you can use the little arrows in the bottom left-hand corner.
Okay.
Is it not working?
Oh, there it is. There it is. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
great.
Okay, here we go. We try to be a voice for consumers. We're also a bit of a watchdog with the wood stove industry, and we work for more incentives for the very cleanest, most efficient wood and pellet heaters to really try to bring this energy source to the fore in a much cleaner way than it has been in the past. Just a few slides on background. So what is the third most common heat in the United States once you include secondary and primary? So there are a lot of homes, about 10 million homes have stoves. As you saw from Joel's presentation, a lot of people aren't using them at any one time, depending on whether it's what kind of winter it is. And nationally, you can see Utah does not have a lot of people on a per capita basis that use wood as a primary heat source. But what we know about wood is that it really is a localized problem in terms of wood smoke. And areas where you have mountains and deep valleys, even though the statewide per capita may be low, you can have a very serious wood smoke problem. And in many valleys and out west, it's often the first, second, third, or fourth highest PM source during the wintertime. A little bit more about Utah here. The green line is Utah and the purple line is the nation overall. You can see that wood burning really bottomed out at 1970. It's amazing. The fossil fuels were so cheap through the 50s and 60s that pretty much the whole country got rid of their stoves or just stopped using them. Then there's a major bounce back that peaked at around 1990 with the Arab oil embargo. And levels dropped again by 2000, but then since 2000 they've been going back up. And I think that's why all over the country a lot of communities are dealing with more wood smoke issues. And you can see here that nationwide and Utah wood heating grew by 40% between 2000 and 2013. So wood has been the fastest growing heating source in the country since the year 2000. Now overall, there's still only about 2.5 million people who use it as a primary heat source and over 10 as a secondary heat source. But that jump is really quite significant since 2000. And this, Joel's data, of course, is far better than this. This is the EPA numbers that he referred to, which are really estimates. But I think it's important to really look at this is a county issue. It's not a statewide issue. And Salt Lake County does have about half the people in the valley. So if Salt Lake does something, it's going to go a long way to clearing up smoke all along the Front Range, because smoke does move can move pretty far in an inversion over a 72-hour period. Okay, so I'm going to talk mostly about fuel strategies, but I did want to run through the appliance strategies in terms of reducing wood smoke quickly. So a lot of states are now trying to move people from wood to pellets. So there are some states now that are doing incentive programs for pellet appliances, especially with homes or sometimes only for homes that do not have a gas connection. So for instance, in New York, there's some pretty generous rebates. If you don't have gas, they will help you move to a pellet appliance. Maryland has a similar program. Now, there are also change-out programs. These tend to be somewhat expensive, and this is where a state or a county or air district will give people like $1,000, for example, to change out their old wood stove and buy a new one. Or sometimes, increasingly, states are only subsidizing new pellet stoves. You can only move from an old wood stove to a new pellet stove, because even new wood stoves can be problematic because so many people do not use them very well and don't use seasoned wood in them. The next one is a bounty or buyback program. These are more and more popular. This is where a state or county will offer like $100 or $200 or $300 to turn in an old wood stove, and no questions asked. So often you do get wood stoves that haven't been used in the past couple of years, and that's the downside. But you also get a lot of old wood stoves and people are just ready to give them up, and they may use that $300 to buy a new one, or they may not. But this is just a way of getting some old wood stoves out of the airshed. Now we're getting into some of the more unpopular ones, is banning the future installation of uncertified stoves in fireplaces. California has, some California towns, including the Bay Area, do ban the installation of fireplaces. Actually, the entire Washington and Oregon state ban the installation of uncertified stoves. So you can still have a thriving market, secondhand market of certified stoves, which means any stove that was built after 1990. And increasingly, in a lot of areas, a third of the stoves on the market may be certified, because it's now been several decades since they've been making certified stoves. And this is something I think can work in more areas, because no one wants to, usually these programs, everything is grandfathered, so it doesn't apply to anything that anyone has already installed, but it's just an attempt to keep out the more uncertified stoves from appearing in households. Okay, the next one, and this goes hand in hand, is requiring permits and inspections to install stoves. If you do want to keep old stoves from being installed, it does help to have inspections and permits so that inspectors can check on what is being installed. And it also really helps make sure that the appliances are safely installed, and that also can impact emissions, because a lot of stoves, if they're not installed properly, they will emit more PM. Because the chimneys are the engine for stoves, and if you don't have a good engine, the stove can smolder and also leak more air into the home, more smoke into the home. Okay, the next one, including stoves and energy audits and engaged chimney sweeps. Energy audits are a fantastic tool. If the energy auditors would check the safety and the installation of a stove, help educate homeowners and urge them to replace an old stove, just as they would be urging them to replace other inefficient HVAC equipment. It really helps over time to move more of the old stoves out of commission. And the very last one, this is very unpopular. It's only been tried in one place. It's a sunset clause. So that would be like, say, in 2020, you'd say no one can use any uncertified stove. And in Washington State, they did this. They set a date about 5 years in advance, and they offered rebates to say for the next 5 years, anyone can take $1,000 and upgrade their stove to a certified one. But after that date, 5 years from now, if you have an uncertified stove, you simply cannot use it. This, of course, takes a lot of resources, and it takes a lot of effort. And it's not possible everywhere, but I think we may be seeing some more programs like that around the country. Okay, so I'll get into some more of the fuel issues now. So, to reduce wood smoke, really the best way is simply to reduce the number of wood stoves in an airshed, whether they be certified or uncertified. But especially you want to reduce the number of uncertified wood stoves. And then, and this is more of a phenomenon in the Northeast where pellet stoves are popular, is simply getting a larger and larger share of the population on pellet stoves. In some areas, half the people heating with wood are heating with pellet stoves, so they're becoming quite popular in some areas. And the last is ensure that your wood is seasoned. And a quick look at here, some of the options. You can talk about biobricks more, but biobricks, it's just like a pellet. It's a compressed wood, but you really need to be careful that you're not burning compressed cardboard. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I wanted to show that there are some products out there which we definitely don't recommend. Okay, so, and again, I think in a lot of these areas, you really don't have to worry too much about pellet stoves. The great thing about pellet stoves is they work in the test lab just as they do in the home, kind of like our cars do. You're going to get pretty similar results when they're certified as you do when they're installed, and the opposite is true with pellets, with wood stoves. Wood stoves can look great in the lab, but they can be all over the place in someone's home. So we always advocate that bans, any sort of ban or restriction on wood stove should not necessarily apply to pellet stoves. And I always hate seeing areas that will be really restricting pellet stoves the same way that wood stoves are. Okay, so bio bricks. These, I think there is a lot of potential to do education and promotion of bricks. And the EPA has started doing that. As I mentioned, there is some quality control problems. Pellets now have a really good certification program by the Pellet Fuel Institute, and more pellets are certified for quality and consistency. And most bricks are fine. 90% of bricks are just 100% wood. You do have to watch out for a couple companies. And these have been proven to reduce PM from wood stoves dramatically because they are so dry. They're the same as a pellet. They're about 8% or moisture content. And they're about the same price as cordwood per BTU, but they're a lot more condensed. So you can stack the equivalent of a cord in about half the space or less than a cord, and they're not as messy. So there's been a lot more uptake, certainly in the Northeast, I think parts of the West. But still, a lot of people don't know about these, and I always encourage air districts and others to really start promoting these and letting consumers know that they're available on the market. Now, firewood associations have had some real success in other countries, not yet in the United States, at a national level. We've just had our first National Firewood Association begin, the NFA, National Firewood Association. In France, these are very well recognized programs where if a consumer buys from a company that belongs to a certification program, they will be assured of getting dry firewood and be assured of getting the correct amount that they pay for. So, and then at the local level, like Fairbanks has a voluntary program where the county would promote any company that would only deliver dry firewood. And if they got complaints, then they would kick them out of the program. And so I think that helped a little bit. It could be much more robust, but you can have voluntary programs where in return for publicity, you promise that you're only going to deliver seasoned wood, that you would, on the receipt, that you mark the moisture content, you test it for the consumer before you dump it in their driveway. And of course, there is a premium with that. It may cost more than your competitors, but I think a lot of people would really appreciate that, and it really does help reduce smoke. Like in France, Australia is a very successful model, Firewood Association of Australia. They got a government grant to start up, and I think almost all firewood suppliers now belong to this association, and they really do keep track of moisture content, and it has resulted in the supply of firewood being much more dry, and it's a voluntary program run by industry, but with close cooperation with government. And again, yeah, NFA, they're in their infancy. I think I hope that we'll see them really taking more initiative and certifying dealers or something to that effect. Here's a mandatory program in the Bay Area. If you're delivering firewood in the Bay Area, you have to mark it seasoned or unseasoned, and they do check. And I think that has been somewhat effective in the Bay Area. Okay, a couple more slides. In Europe, generally, a lot of the firewood now, it costs more over there, but they're delivering it on pallets and in bags, and that has helped to bring up the quality in terms of moisture and volume. And this is now very common, and it's starting, a few places in the States are starting to do this. Okay, and back to energy audits. And if there's anyone on the call that has connections with the energy audit process in Utah, I'd love to talk to them, because there is now a way for energy auditors to use a software or a little booklet to walk them through how you assess a wood stove and determine whether it's safe, and whether it may lead to just needing to bring in more of a stove expert, but at least it provides a first brush of inspection that'll help the homeowner know whether they should be fixing something or getting rid of it altogether. This has been very slow in coming, but especially in homes where the wood stove is the primary heat source, a lot of energy auditors have no clue how to assess it, and so it doesn't get looked at all. And energy auditors can also be looking at firewood. They can take a moisture meter, they could look how it's stored, and leave recommendations with homeowners about how they should stack and store and season their wood before they use it. And that's it. So thanks very much. I encourage anyone to take any questions, and in the future, if anyone has any issues, to just call us directly.
Thanks, John. Can you talk about, you just mentioned the booklet for conducting an energy audit. Is that something that is available to the general public, or can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it is. It's done through BPI, the Building Performance Institute, and they have a checklist. And it's designed for energy auditors, but really anyone could use it to conduct a brief inspection of their stove. So we could either send that to you, or maybe when you post this as a on your site, I could include a link to it.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I think people would be interested in learning more about that. And I'm not seeing any questions come up, so if there are any other questions, please feel free to type them in the chat pod below. I guess I'm just generally curious, John, how did you come to create the Alliance for Green Heat? Is that something that you formed, and how long ago did that happen?
Yeah, I formed it in 7 years ago, 2009, because well, I've always loved wood heating. I've heated with wood. Grew up in New Hampshire for part of my life, and I just saw in Washington that there was no real advocacy as an energy source other than the industry group HPBA, which really kind of has a pretty narrow, a little more of a narrow focus on manufacturers. And so I just started up on my own, and I've been scrapping here and there for funding. But it's been going pretty well, and we've gotten a lot of funding from New York State, because New York is really trying to increase cleaner burning all over the state and getting more homes to use renewables. We have some funding from the Forest Service as well, I should mention. We're part of an MOU with some other biomass groups with the Forest Service, and I found, there's so much focus on solar and wind and other issues, but there has not been nearly as much focus on wood. And we've seen in other countries, like in Italy and all through Europe, wood and pellet heating is really a mainstay of the renewable energy community. And that's what we'd like to see here as well. It's still kind of the poor cousin of other renewables in the United States.
Well, I certainly appreciate you taking the time to prepare this presentation. You and Joel provided some good perspective for us here in Utah, and I know you gave a similar talk to was it state legislator last February?
Yes.
Okay, and yeah, so I learned a lot today, and I believe our audience did as well. So unless there's any other questions, this webinar will be posted on our YouTube page. I'll go ahead and put that YouTube address in the chat pod below, so you can watch it and reference it in the future if you would like to do so. We're going to have a couple poll questions pop up that are evaluation questions for this webinar. So if you could stick around just to answer those as well, that would be really helpful. Again, just wanted to remind you about our webinar next month. It's going to be taking place on April 19th, so please mark your calendar. If you would like SAF CEUs for attending today, please send me or Bethany your name and your identification number. And again, thanks for tuning in for our March Learn at Lunch webinar, and have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you so much, Joel and John, and you guys have a good day too.